for having a smaller group, but like, yeah. And this really is just kind of like a little bonus of like, hey, okay, start thinking through this, and then maybe that's the thing that you talk to your therapist about the next time, and maybe that you come back and we like work through it with you, you know, that sort of stuff. So this by no means has to be just a conversation tonight. It can hopefully a conversation that is continuing. So
I'm going to give a little intro to you. My name is Jackie. I am a physical therapist here, also our clinic communications coordinator. So I kind of help pick topics and pick therapists to present on these parent and services. And Jess is presenting, as you know, on floor time, play, and handling. Jess is amazing. She does amazing things with kids here. She is research-based in everything she does. And I'm really excited for you guys to hear what she has to say to me.
guys, it's so nice to meet all of you. Okay, so yes, like I said, floor time, play, and handling, and like how to make it work for you. So, you know, this does not have to fit like a certain shape or what you think it should look like. This is like meeting your kid where they're at, whatever that is that they love to be doing at home, and just getting them in a position that maybe helps them get strength or develop in a way that their therapist is already working toward, but just adding that into the day that you already have, right? Not necessarily making it separate. There's been lots of studies that have shown that the more that parents can just add these in throughout their day, one, it's easier on your brain, right? Than having to like sit down and be like, now what was it she said? What am I supposed to be doing? And then the kid is going to be so much more successful because they're going to go back to that same ball tower, right? That's one of our favorite toys in the gym. So the ball tower itself isn't necessarily the most physical therapy based toy, but it's usually the position we get them in while they're playing with the ball tower. But that's what makes it a success. So one thing I did want to clarify is, especially if you're working with an occupational therapist, there is a specific floor time certification that you can get out there. It's awesome. It's amazing. I've listened to a couple like Zoom classes about it. That is different than what we're doing tonight. It's somewhat like inspirational for this, but that is a therapist gets certified in it, and you seek that therapist out for floor time, either sensory input or there can be a lot of things that are addressed through that. So I learned about it from occupational therapists, and so I think it is mostly seen in that department. But so just so you know, like when I reference floor time, there is, if you hear that phrase, there is a specific floor time, DIR is what it's referenced as, DIR floor time. And so, oh, perfect. Hi, yes. Hello. Anywhere, yes, anywhere you want to sit, guys. We just started. And so I was saying, I know your little one pretty well, but you guys can hear names for everybody.
Yes, I'm Lacey Berger. This is my husband, Adam.
Yes, and so I was just saying to be thinking about what you guys need to like at home. This like doesn't have to be change. We talked about a little bit, but just like adding it into your day. It can be something separate, but just already into what you're doing. So, but I was explaining that DIR floor time is a specific. It's something that you can only do if you are certified in it. So, but what we're working on today is how to get into your kiddos world and meet them where they're at to make them successful in what you guys are working on in therapy, without adding, you know, like a whole extra thing to your day, but just adding in where they're already at. So the first thing that we want to start with, like we were talking about, is alignment. So the first picture is kind of that's like our target, right? We're looking for your kiddo to be in that nice upright position. And a lot of times we see this, and a lot of times too, as a mom, you don't notice it on your own kiddo because that you see them every day, right? The same as us. A lot of us, if we did an alignment analysis, we would be off-centered just because of life, right? Like maybe our job makes us off-centered, or maybe just things that we've done in our life have done that. And so as we went through PT school, we checked each other out, and it was like, whoa, I had no idea that we had all these, you know, abnormalities in different like positions. And for the most part, it usually doesn't affect us, right? Especially if it is job related, then we just continue on. But maybe down the road, oh, okay, our shoulder is starting to hurt because we spent so much time in a position. And so for our kiddos, we want to set them up for success. So if something is already challenging, like picking up blocks or whatever it may be, if they're not in that like best alignment, then we're kind of already like, it's already in a challenged position and the task is challenging. Our body is set up in a way that when we get ourselves posturally as close as we can to that neutral alignment, that's where our muscles best work. So kind of from a physics like standpoint, right, those pulley systems, the best like direction that a muscle can work on is best from that first picture. And so when we're here and maybe we're trying to use our right arm to reach for something, we're already kind of a little just more challenged because our neck is not where we like we're full front. But we can, that doesn't mean that everyone's gonna look like that, right? Like I said, not everyone looks like the first picture all the time because I had to do effort, right, to look in like that position. So we are gonna just try to find the best alignment for your kiddo and work toward that, but sometimes getting them in that position so that we can get some work done just gives that brain that re-understanding of like, oh yeah, this is what center feels like. So we do that a lot on the horse here, which that's like one of our favorite things for having the horse, is sometimes our kiddos don't even know when they're off center. So you might see your kiddo off to the, right of the horse, and we sometimes let them be there so that their brain can get the feedback of, oh, I'm not even in the center. And then, we get them to correct that. But so sometimes their little brains don't even have that understanding that they are. So when we see them, they may feel truly to themselves like, oh, I'm sitting upright, but we see, something different. So that's something we love the horse for.
Is there specific language that you guys usually get them back to that certain?
Yeah, so we usually try to ask them like, hey, do you feel like you're in the middle?
Okay.
That's kind of our big word, I would say, is like, do you feel like you're in the middle? Do you feel like you're off center? Kind of those words. And it's surprising, even our kiddos, right, who aren't verbal or who maybe still a little young for that concept, usually they'll start to like shift themselves, right? And sometimes they way overshoot it, and that kind of gives us feedback too, or sometimes they undershoot it. And so that tells us a little bit about their brain's understanding of where they are in space. But yeah, usually we'll say like, are you in the middle? So sometimes you might, if you see your kiddo like at the dinner table, like one of my little ones has some vision difficulties, and so she's always to the side of her chair, and then she's like falling off of it. And so I say like, are you in the middle of your chair? And sometimes she genuinely thinks that she is until she stops and looks down, and then she can scoot herself over. But so yes, that is kind of the phrasing that we like to use. That's a good question. So one thing that I love to do, especially with your little one, is having something under the hips. So when we look at our kiddos tonight, we might see that their hips are really tilted backward. We might see that they're really tilted forward. We love if they're backward to put something underneath that just gets their hips up in that position, because this big abdominal muscle is called our transverse abdominis. It's kind of our back brace. So as if you would put a back brace on, like if you had an injury, they mimic actually the muscles that we have naturally. A lot of times we think of those like six-pack muscles, but actually a lot of our kiddos, we kind of try to turn those off because sometimes those are so turned on that we're trying to turn on other things. So when we get that pelvis in a good position, that kicks on that brace muscle. So when they're reaching for a block and maybe that's challenging, so a lot of times it's crazy what we see. Like when we turn that brace on, it's like, whoa, because this has to be able to move and legs have to be able to move. But if this is unstable too, our brain is first like, whoa, I can't do anything until this is okay. And then I can go out here. And sometimes we see our kiddos, especially who have been weak for a long time, right? They start to learn to live life because eventually we do have to. And we see those compensations, right? But then when we, every once in a while, get that turned on beautifully, we'll see something really nice. So this is kind of what I was talking about. What can we do to what they're already doing to get an effect that we're wanting? So I have some kiddos who have some really tight hamstrings, but they love playing with Play-Doh on the floor. So I'm not gonna, they won't let me stretch their hamstrings for 30 seconds like I would do an athlete, right? But they'll let me slowly start to stretch them if I'm talking about Play-Doh with them and letting them play with that. But instead of sitting crisscross applesauce, maybe I have them sitting with their legs out. So that's kind of what tonight is about, is just how can we modify what they're already doing and what they already love to do to accomplish what we're working on in therapy and at home. So another thing that I hear a lot of parents ask is like, okay, well, they have to sit for story time, or now that we're like getting back into activities, we have to sit in, crisscross applesauce, or we call it Taylor sit. And so some of my kiddos, they look great in that. And then other times I have one especially that she is such an advocate for herself that she tells her teacher, I can't sit in crisscross applesauce, I can sit in mermaid, which is like both legs going to the side. And that takes her having that understanding, but maybe we can be that as parents, right? Hey, my kiddo can't sit like that, but they will sit and listen to that story if you let them sit, like this, and then we can kind of incorporate, okay, what is their most successful position that gets them in that best alignment. And that way they have that go-to, right? So sometimes we just like go after the thing that the mainstream wants, right? They want them to sit crisscross applesauce, but I later will talk about side sit. I actually love side sit the most. And so if we can get our kiddos at home to feel confident in a position that when we do go out in the community, we can say like, hey, they can't do that, but they can do this really well, which will still let them listen to what you want them to do.
Do you have anything for W setting? I mean, that's a constant, mine.
Yes.
Constant battle, and I'm always trying to just rework her leg around to do a side sit.
Yep.
Or crisscross. And she's constantly going back, and I know it's like because of these back muscles and things like that.
Yes.
It's easier for that to compensate,
Right.
but I know eventually it will affect her walking and everything else. So what?
So
you
that's
guys
a
have
tough
for
one in
that
the sense that it is that just like continuous like correction, right? And it's hard. I will tell you guys at home is hardest, right? Home is hardest for all of us. When we get home at the end of the day, home is our safe place where we just like let all of our baggage out, right? So like we hear all the time, well, just because they do it there, like this is not what home is like, right? Like, and we get that, right? Especially us as parents, we're like, yes, my little one is a W sitter, and everyone in her life like has just known, okay, yep, we just kind of fix her legs. And now that she's getting to that understanding, right, of like, oh, okay, this is helping my body get stronger. Now for Margaret, right, like she starts to know I'm going for her legs, and sometimes she'll move it on her own because again, she knows what to expect. The home is like her, oh, I can let go and just be. So there are times like even my 4-year-old Maverick, she sits in the W sit and she has a vision. So sometimes at the end of the day, I give it to her, right? Like she's exhausted and she wants to play, and that W sit might be the only chance that she like isn't laying on the floor. So that's a choice, right? Like if Margaret feels tired and that's the battle that you're not going to pick right now, like that's okay too. And I think that, sometimes you just need to hear that as parents, like this can't be the always, right? You can't be on 100% of the time, and neither are they. But unfortunately, yes, the best correction is the repetition, because the more that her brain feels that change, the more that like a lot of times we'll see kiddos that'll start to, oh, I'm in W sit, and they'll move themselves just because the repetition is really, really the best thing that we've found. For W sit, there's not a lot, unfortunately. It's like our arch nemesis, but like, yeah, it's repetition is kind of the best. So yeah, just swinging that leg around to side sit. I like that solution the best, because sometimes I feel like the whole W sit to crisscross applesauce is like such a far that they're like, well, that's too much. Like, I'm just gonna go right back into W sit. So side sit, I love to go from W sit. So side sit though, I love for you and them. So I took this course, and some of you might know her on Instagram as Connective Kids. She's a physical therapist out of Dallas, Texas, and she is wild. So let me preface with that first, like it might not be the Instagram account for you, but as far as her like knowledge of kids and what works, because sometimes I think pediatrics, we get stuck in what we've done for decades and we don't focus on what's working with the kid. So I do love, I took a course through her team that she has in Dallas, and I do love what she has to say. So I tell parents it's a great resource. Like I used it with my own girls, but it is, it's someone on the internet. So just like take that with a grain of salt. And like I said, she's spicy. So, which I think is why sometimes she works with the kids so well, right? Because she's got that spicy to meet them. But I love it for you and them, because how often are we on the ground, right? And we're bent over and we are trying to hold our kids in a position that we just we can't sustain this position ourselves, or on the stairs, right? Like we're just down there, there are some times where you're like, okay, I can push through this for one activity, but then I can't hang out here. So I love side sitting. So this is like the example of your kiddo being in front of you, right? So, and for some of us, it's hard to get into this position. Like my husband's been trying it, and at first he was like, I cannot sit like that. My hips just don't do that. But it's actually super healthy for our hips and our back. It turns on that transverse abdominis, or we call it a TA muscle. And it's a very dynamic position. So now we do more desk jobs where we are in a more static, but really life is spent dynamic. So we don't stay in this position very long ever, and kiddos especially not. So that's why I love side sitting even more than crisscross applesauce, is because right from there, and we'll do it in the big gym, and I'll have you do it too, but right from there, you can reach, right? You can go right into hands and knees, and then we can go somewhere else. And it just protects your low back and gets your hips moving in ways that are great for down the road and even like right now. So it's strengthening and stretching all at the same time. So that's why we love it for the kiddos, but we also love it for you guys. And it kind of gets them closer to you. So another thing we say, especially even when we're carrying our kids or working with them, the closer they are to you, the healthier it is for your body. And so you can have them a lot closer to you because you can, the way that our legs are angled when we side sit versus when our legs are kind of out or like crisscross or in a chair. So that's what I love it for. And then from here, we can go into hands down, right? So a lot of our kiddos are working on weight bearing or getting our hands open. And so that's a great one, reaching, and then going on to hands and knees. This is kind of the prerequisite for getting onto hands and knees. We can get there without this position, but it's usually not really pretty, and not, we like to see this come first. So that's one for both you and for them. So the next one, so right now we're kind of just talking through different positions that we're looking at. So a lot of times, especially from the PT perspective, we are just looking through these positions and kind of seeing where they're at. How are they getting between these positions is a huge thing. So we call that transition. So tall kneel. So what we're looking for here is that they're away from whatever they're playing on. So you'll probably see, like, especially at the end of the day, when you see your kiddos leaning on whatever surface that they are playing at, whether that's like a coffee table or like a playhouse or something. So a lot of times we just kind of give little taps there. It doesn't have to be, a big move back, because usually they'll fight that and go right back. But if you just kind of give little taps, they usually get their tummy muscles on enough to say like, oh, okay, I'll lean back just a little bit. So again, that's where you can meet them where they're at, right? You don't have to stop what they're playing with, but you can just give that little modification, and it helps that I do understand it helps that I have the PT mindset, right? When I'm at home with my kiddos. But it does help if I'm just sitting there having a tea party with her. I just kind of tap her belly, and she like will lean and get away from the table. And then, she comes back and I tap it again, and similar, at the knees, right? So that's something huge we do with Kaya, is just that soft knees, and we see that hyperextension, right? Those knees are pushing way back. So just a little tap at the back of the knees. And sometimes it's continuous for that whole 25 minutes, but that's what that's giving that brain the feedback to like, oh, okay, I just need a little bend. I don't have to be here, but I don't want to be way back. So another thing that we can do here that we also love to do in standing is rotating back. Well, I'll show you in half kneel as well, the next slide, but basically just reaching behind you. So if your kiddo's playing here and you're like, hey, can you hand me that teacup? Try to be behind them, because that rotation is one dynamic. It turns on those obliques, and it's also the weight shift that we need for steps, for crawling, for all those movements that we love. That rotation just by default gets our hips moving, gets our trunk turning. And so I'll show you in half kneel kind of what that looks like. So especially in half kneel and in standing, when we do that rotation, it actually impacts our feet and our hips. So something we call all the way up and down the chain is what we look at. So nothing that we do or our kids do is just one body part, it's the whole body. And so when we do this rotation, it turns on the arch of our foot. It turns on the weight shift that we have to take that step. We don't really think about it, but every time we walk, we're in single limb stance for a split second. There's a moment in all of our gaits where we take our foot off. And so it requires us to shift all of our weight onto one and then the other. And this rotation helps us start that weight shift. So I love it, for working at a vertical surface too in half kneel, so starting is best at a horizontal surface, so playing at a table, playing at a chair. And then, so something here, and then moving to something here, because they don't have that surface they can lean on, but they can still support themselves. So we have giant mirrors, so we have, the suction toys, the squigs, those are like the biggest hit with our kids. Drawing, so at home, and you have to be careful, but I'll put like big pieces of paper and have them draw up against the wall. Again, you have to, like, you don't want it to carry over to when the paper is not there, but you guys know your kiddos, so maybe like an easel instead. Or we love shaving cream on the mirror, and some of our kids love it, some of them don't like the texture, but so anything that you can get them that they already love to do, that's kind of what we keep wanting to focus back on, is getting into their world, is gonna make everyone the most successful. So another option is reaching overhead. So a lot of times when we have to put on our shirt or we have to pull something down, like reaching for car seats or backpacks, we have to do this overhead reaching that we don't train a lot in kids. We do it a lot in athletes and even in adults, because if that's something their job requires, we address it, but we don't think about it a lot in kids. We do a lot of working down here. But reaching overhead is a huge component for a lot of things that they do in their day. So this is a good position to work that as well. Okay, so this is one, we just did a orthotic in service where we all went and learned from Transcend Orthotics. And I loved this point that they made. So they called it a push to stand instead of a pull to stand. So we always kind of learn it, right? Like our kid's gonna cruise along the couch, they're gonna pull themselves up first. But really, these are our powerhouse muscles, and so it's really a push to stand. These are more just for stability, and then we can go into that cruising, but it's really about, so we talk about the glutes, the core, the quads, and the hamstrings. So those are our power muscles that we use in our everyday life, and those are our power muscles for our kids. So when they are squatting down to get those toys, that's working those muscles. And a lot of our kids love to just push back into extension and bend at the hips to pick something up. And sometimes we pick up that too, right? So we go to pick something up, but we don't bend properly, right? We just bend over, and we hear people say, use your legs, but it really does. I mean, it trains not just the muscles, it trains the brain. So this big ramp that we have down here, for us to slow ourselves down while we're walking, it requires all those big muscles to turn on. So things we don't think about that these muscles are being used for, especially in our kids, like playgrounds, those are so important. So that is why I loved that they described it as a push to stand and not necessarily a pull to stand. So one thing that we talk about is the ankle stability. So a lot of us have gone through bracing together or are moving out of bracing. Whether your kiddos are in braces or not, I still think it's a great idea to work both in braces and not in braces. It gives their feet sensory information. It gives their ankles understanding. So a lot of times we see our kids do that like wobble, right? Or they trip. And we see it kind of as a negative of like, oh man, they just keep falling or they just keep tripping. But every time that we fall or we stumble or we have that shake of instability, it sends the brain information of like, oops, something didn't work there. It's amazing. It's really like the way that our brain troubleshoots. And so the more that you get that feedback, even though we don't want our kids to get hurt and we don't want to put their joints in unsafe places, they still need to get that information. So even our kiddos who graduate from the bracing, right, that they're like, oh, they look good, we're gonna take the braces away. Those first couple weeks, they'll kind of Bambi like, they're still trying to figure that out, because even though they've got the strength, they still don't have quite all the feedback that their brain needs to know, well, what do I do when I step on a rock? Or what do I do when I'm trying to go up grass? Something like that. So I love doing work at home, both bare feet and in bracing, especially if your kiddos were bracing for the bulk of their day. Having time without it is so important too. So and that is a case by case for sure. So talk with your therapist. Say, what are your thoughts? What can I be doing safely without the bracing, and what can I be doing with the bracing? So,
Yeah, I had a question too. That's
Yeah.
like, that's kind of like my question with my daughter, because she doesn't walk, but I
Yes.
mean, we obviously stand her and try to walk her, but like,
yeah,
I get very nervous to stand her without her braces because she is just, like, I literally see like sometimes her ankle will just give and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's gonna sprain her ankle
mhm.
and just like, or snap her ankle or something. And so I guess if that's okay for her to do that, like, I would do it more, but I don't do it very much. So I guess I didn't think about that. Like, I
Yeah.
don't stand her a lot in her bare feet because it.
I think it's good. I stand her
Okay.
a lot in her bare feet.
Do you? Okay, good. I'm
Sorry, I
still-
didn't communicate it.
No, we still do it, but it just makes me nervous
Yeah.
because she's so, I mean, and I'm not, and it just makes me a lot more nervous because her ankles are just so like.
And that could be something where
Yeah.
it's a pro and a con of here, of any clinic, right? We love the work our kids do when they're back there because they're so focused and when they learn this place is safe and they really can focus on just what we're asking them. But then there's the downside, right? We did an hour's worth of stuff and the chaos of the waiting room we're all aware of, right? Like when you're trying to like talk, but listen to your kids and all of that, and then 12 other kids. And so a lot of times I come back here and I'm like, I told you nothing of what I wanted to tell you. And
Well,
then
you
like
may have told me that and I
send
just
an
didn't.
email or, but then by the next week, you're like, something new came up and you've just, so
Yeah.
you can say those things and I wish we could, get that information out to all parents.
I just need to
right?
think about it, honestly, like, I
Yes.
didn't think to ask you, and I'm not always the one that brings her, so
No.
sometimes it's her nurse, so I don't always get to communicate with
Yes,
that piece,
And
so.
sometimes you're just like nervous, right? So you kind of just shut that down and you wouldn't think to ask it, right?
Well, and I remember with her first steps therapist, they were always kind of weird about her not standing her, this is before she even, but they were weird about it, so I just always in my mind, I just never even thought to even ask you,
Yes.
honestly, so I
Yeah,
just.
and
always
maybe that's
assume.
something, like, so if you are doing it barefoot, but maybe that's a conversation or even like a video, right? So maybe Jackie, I've been trying to do that a little bit more with some of my kids is like, if a parent's like, what does this look like back there? And if nurse brings them or nanny, then I try to take a video or something and
Yeah.
email that. Because you're right, like, if you're not sure what something looks like and you're just like, I want to protect her, but strengthen her.
Yeah,
So yeah, that is great. And there are gonna be some situations where maybe it's like, no, right now, we gotta keep those ankles safe, and
Yeah.
so let's keep those braces on. So yeah, I think that's great to have that conversation. But it is something to be thinking about. And maybe, I know there's efforts to make braces. We don't always work with those as well, but your OT will be able to answer a lot of those questions. So yes, there's all kinds of bracing. Okay, so this is what we were talking about before, standing at a vertical surface. So I know we need to get in to do the lab portion, right? Is it at well after 7? So this is our last one. This is one thing I learned from Connective Kid as well, and I've seen a lot of progress with my kiddos is that standing at a vertical surface because they get so confident standing at a table or standing at the back of the couch or whatever they may be using. And then, or their gait trainers, right? And then when we take that away, they just get a little, they're like, hold on, what am I gonna use? And so it requires their brain to really think like, oh, am I stable? Okay, maybe I'll take a step to the side. And then, so it starts that progress that when we've got something horizontal and stable to hold on to, our brain isn't ever gonna question that because it's like, I feel good, I feel confident, I'm not gonna rock the boat, right? Our body takes the path of least resistance is what we always learned in school. So if I feel good about it, my body's not gonna look for a more challenging option. Okay, let's go in. Well, okay, first off, before we get the kiddos, is there anything where you're like, this is for sure what I wanna see? And maybe we can, Jackie, would you be up for like kind of going around too? And even Kara, like going around to you guys and saying like, okay, this is what we're working on, and like maybe you want to see standing there, but yeah, maybe yeah.
Over now, I'm not.
But we can go in there and
We're
we
getting
can start working through
They're
like that
bringing
progression even. So let's get into side sit. So maybe that's what we should do first. Let's do that first. Every one of you guys get into side sit when you get in there and just feel what that feels like. Do you feel stretching? Do you feel pulling? Do you feel like your muscles turning on? Feel your different body parts and feel what you're feeling, because it really is such a good position. There are a few things you shouldn't, I would say it's good for everybody. If there's a moment where you're like, this feels uncomfortable, modify it, but I think it's great for everybody. So let's go try that.
Mary, finally, well, we got in. I think we're gonna do new ones next.
Okay, great.
Because her horrible legs are getting worse, I think.